Hello, welcome to the January 16th, 2026 Club Cubase livestream. My name is Greg Undo and I'm the host of the livestream today. If you have not attended a livestream before, how it works is you can just simply ask questions in the live chat field or send questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. When asking questions, realize that my ability to answer questions in a real-time manner may soon be eclipsed. I will try my best throughout the live stream to catch up and get through all the questions. We will go through all the questions chronologically as asked. So if you don't see an immediate response to your question, if we could avoid asking the same question repeatedly, that would be appreciated. Just kind of slows down the whole process. We should have an index of all topics that are discussed in today's live stream pinned to the top of the comments field several hours after the live stream ends. And if you want to search for topics that have been covered in previous live streams, you could go to cubaseindex.com. We want to thank Jan from Stockholm for creating a wonderful site. We have two people that serve as moderators, Jazz Dude and Agent K. They're not Steinberg employees. They do it to make it a better community experience for everyone. So we want to give special thanks to them. We'll also give an extra expression of gratitude towards Jazz Dude for the wonderful unofficial Cubase Nation Discord site. And with that, and that's a wonderful resource of information for the Steinberg community. So, take advantage of it. Also, in asking questions, it's also helpful if you could specify which version of the software you're using. So if with Cubase, if it's Cubase LE, AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro, which version number, such as 12, 13, 14, or 15, and the operating system. That information is helpful. So once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America, and I primarily focus on Steinberg products. I'm presenting from just in the United States, just outside of Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. And if you're watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. It's always fascinating to see people from all over the world joining. One quick programming note, there will be no live streams next week because of the NAMM show. So I'll be doing booth setup on Tuesday, and we'll be in the middle of the NAMM show on Friday. We will, a week from Tuesday, resume our live streams, and I think I will miss that following Friday because I have to speak at Ohio Music Educators Conference. But our next live stream will be a week from Tuesday, which I believe will be the 27th. So just a quick programming note on that. All right, so with that, we'll go ahead and start with questions. So Del Sur Music asks, hello Greg, do you have any information on a new CC1 Yamaha controller? So yeah, well good, and I think I pulled up the website for it. So this is kind of we could think of it a bit like where a lot of people would use kind of the CC1 for a single fader control surface. So with this, and what this is going to be kind of a single fader device. It's a motorized fader, and I have to say the fader feels really good. You get a jog wheel. This will work as an AI mode, transport controls, your basic channel controls for panning. We have mute, solo, read, write, automation, record, monitor, enable, select the next channels, transport. And what makes this really special, you have 4 rotary encoders. But this is basically a Stream Deck. So this is using kind of the Stream Deck technology. So you have 12 Stream Deck buttons, and it will come with various options for functionality that's built into Cubase. It'll connect via USB-C to the computer, and you could also have external, so it's not, and it could be externally powered via like a 5-volt USB-C connection as well. So if you're running low on USB power, which a lot of us that have lots of peripherals can run into, this is now kind of a perfect little desktop companion piece. So a lot of people would kind of liken it to the CC121. It's going to have fewer rotary encoders, but as we look at it, these encoders can actually be tied directly into functionality of the Stream Deck as well. So these encoders are also kind of push, so that you could have different functionality as you kind of push in the controllers. It's not and it is a endless rotary encoder as well. So just started shipping yesterday, so check it out. It's a lot of cool stuff you can do with the new Yamaha CC1, and you can check pricing for your local country. All right, next question from Delser Music. Can you explain the difference between regular pan and panoramic panning? When is it appropriate to use one over the other? So there could be a lot of definitions for panoramic panning, but let's say if we're on a stereo track, and here we have, a panner that we often see is going to be, if we're on a mono track or a stereo track, you have what's called just a normal panner where we could do this. So we could move this from the left channel to the right channel. Now, once we're on a stereo track, we could kind of just right click and then we could change kind of our pan settings here. So let's say I just kind of click in the pan. Let's see. Make sure I'm in the stereo track. Okay, so now we do this. So I'm going to make sure I'm in the stereo, like this is on a stereo track. And then we could switch to a combined panner. Now with the combined panner, and I'll just make this a little larger, allows us to do is we have a left and right channels. So, instead of just panning, one particular element, what we could do is pan the right channel independently of the left channel. So I can say I want my right channel to start there. I want my left to start here. So let's say I have a stereo source, but I want this stereo source to be kind of limited in kind of the depth of the panning or panorama. And then I want it to pan both the left and right channels to the left or right. And this would also allow us to come over here, and let's say if we want to do this and say, okay, I want to pan the right coming in, the left coming into the center. And if I keep going up, we will see that it turns to an orange color. And that orange color means that we inverted. So physically we see that on the left side is the right panner, and the right side has the left panner. So when you see the panner colors inverted, that indicates that when it changes to orange, that indicates that the channels are now inverted like that. So this gives us more control from a single panner. Instead of, I see some programs have like two separate panners that you'd have to adjust kind of concurrently, but here we could just pan kind of very easily a stereo source and have independent panning control over the left and right channels. All right, also next question from Delser Music. It says, if I use the auto tempo detection and it's varying constantly, is there a way to speed up the whole song and keep the tempo variations in a proportional way? Yeah, so let's come over here. Import stereo file that wasn't recorded to a click track. So let's say if I come directly here, we'll put our click track on. Alright, so if we see that this isn't aligned to our grid, I'm going to do a quick tempo detection. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of come right over here, and we will say, let's go to our project menu, and we want to go to our tempo detection here. So we'll go to our tempo track, tempo detection. We'll say analyze. Okay, so now, all right, and we see that this is where our downbeat is of our particular song. All right, so if we wanted to proportionally speed up our project, so we'll say that's where our 4/4 is. All right, so what I want to do is come over and we will say, let's go to advanced, and I'm going to say set definition from tempo. So what this is going to do is basically embed all of the tempo changes that were detected into the particular audio file itself. So now if I want to maintain those particular contours of the existing tempo, I can now select it, select the tempo events, go to the upper center, and then we could raise all the tempos if I wanted to lower the tempo of this. So we can still have those. Or if I wanted it to speed up, would still have those tempo variations. Or if I wanted to kind of minimize the tempo variations, I could select it right here. And if we go to the right center edge, I could kind of compress. Or we could expand those tempo variations. So once you select the event, go to audio to advanced to set definition from tempo. Then you could have complete control and just kind of select your tempo, increase, decrease, do a decrescendo, do a tempo slowing down like a retard or an accelerando, or going to the right center edge to regulate it to make it more variations or tighten up those particular variations. All right, Luca G7 asks, hey man, is there a way to set up a MIDI remote that switches MIDI remote setups based on the plugin you open up? I'm using Cubase 14 Pro, thanks in advance. So a lot of times when we have our devices set up as kind of for quick controls, so let's say right now I have this set up for quick controls, and it's one of the unique things with focus quick control. So let me come over here. I'm just going to open up a couple plugins. So let's say I want to go to my Ultra Shaper. I want to come over here to, let's say, our frequency EQ. All right. So when we want to work with this. Now, the cool thing with focus quick controls is that for each plugin, if you click on the QC, you could set these quick controls for whatever value, and you could assign these just by clicking on QC. So when I have this plugin open, these controls are automatically, so I come over here, these controls are controlling parameters in the active plugin. When I come over here to this window, I could just say, okay, now I'm controlling parameters on this particular plugin because this is selected. So this becomes the active window. Then we see that nothing is really happening right here. So we can say, okay, nothing is happening right there on my frequency. I click on the frequency plugin, and now these knobs are controlling the frequency plugin for you. So that way you don't have to So once you have focus quick controls, whatever is kind of the active window is what the focus quick controls are controlling. So let me know if that's helpful, and we could set up more elaborate ways if you want to. Okay, let's move on. All right, so we see Claes Olsen, just checking in from Malmo. Great to have you on. We have Stefan Larson, also from Sweden. VS Terranova from the Netherlands. Always fantastic to see Jazz Dude on. All right, so we have Sikanauta 50 joining from Finlandia. Thanks for joining us. All right. All right, we have Space Baby 1174 just saying hello to everyone. All right, Jahian L. Price sending everyone a happy Friday from Granada Hills, California. All right, John Barry joining from the English Riviera. Says, now we know why you've been working on a Stream Deck. So, yeah, the regular Stream Deck XL, I like having 32, physical buttons as well, but I think Stream Decks are pretty cool. But yeah, check out the CC1. All right, so we have Vince joining from Winnipeg, Canada. No Memento also joining from Finland. Tony Trunzo from Australia. Papa Vol joining from New Jersey. We see Matt Elston joining. Great to see you on. Right, we have Benny joining from Sweden. So Bratman Studio says, hey Greg and all Cubasers, question, will the 27th be the Zoom meeting also? So probably, because that'll be the last live stream of the month. If people want to do like a full live stream, I'm happy to do that, and we could wait till February since we didn't have a lot of live streams this month with holidays and NAMM. So if people want to chime in on the comments, whether you want to do the Zoom on the 27th or just do a full live stream, let me know. I could go either way. All right, so we have Roston Nick says, just swinging by to press and like and say hi. People, hope you're doing well. Great to see you on, Nick. Hope you're well. All right, Matt Elliston says, hey Greg, having an issue using Superior Drummer VST3. The render in place command is grayed out in the menus, or anything I can try to get around this, please. Understand it's not Steinberg. So sometimes, like if I open up a plugin, so I'm not sure, I don't use Superior Drummer much. I think I have a license for it, but I tend to use more Groove Agent. But let's say if I have Groove Agent here, all right, so let's say, and I think that Superior Drummer has kind of its own internal sequencer. So let's say if I have this set to follow transport, now when I come over here, we could just say, all right, so this, when I hit play, is at this point, it's like, okay, we hear the audio, we could see the audio, but when I go to render in place, it's going to be grayed out, because rendering, we have to have an event to actually render. So it can't necessarily be something that's just being generated. So make sure that you have like a pattern or events copied over. And then when you have the events copied over, then your render in place options go. So if it's just running kind of on its own internal sequencer without MIDI data, or MIDI data on the project window. At that point, there's nothing for it to render, because we have to render something that's in the timeline so we know where it's at. But as soon as there's an event, so make sure that you have an event in the timeline. So often it's going to be just drag and dropped, and then once the event is in the timeline, it could be selected, and then you could do your rendering as expected. All right, so you see Rick France from Pacific Northwest saying, I hope you have a great NAMM show. Thanks. Looking forward to seeing lots of friends. All right, so whack Uno Memento wants people to whack the like button. And we see questions. Says, I have a UR816C. Could you recommend a unit for expansion of channels? So there's a number of audio interfaces that will work as kind of an ADAT converter. Some, like I have an old RME one that I use in my studios. Those could be a little expensive. Sometimes you can get units that just have mic pre's. Audient has like the ASP 800. I have one of those as well, and that's 8 mic pre's that go directly into the ADAT in. It doesn't have, so it has 8 inputs, but it doesn't have 8 outputs. So if you're looking for outputs and inputs, that may not be the best choice. If you're just looking to capture more sources, that may be a good choice. There's a lot of people there's a Behringer unit that's a couple $100 that a lot of people use and like. They may not be proud of it, but they will often use, the Behringer. I think it's, I'm just blanking on the model number. And I think Focusrite has, and maybe even PreSonus might have like an 8-channel. Not sure if PreSonus does anymore, or I guess it's Fender. I'm not sure if their interfaces will work as ADAT converters, but check out some of those units. And if you need just 8 inputs, the Audient is a really solid choice. If you need 8 inputs and 8 outputs, then I think the ASP 800 is just going to do the input side. But I think Audient has like some of their Evo series as well. People seem to like those. All right, so we see Ode Germanista says Cubase is my main. All right, so we see Daniela. Great to see you on. All right, so Popavol asks, Cubase Pro 15 Mac, can I easily add attributes to my own samples loops I've stored on an external SSD to make them findable in MediaBay searches? What are the limitations? There's not really many limitations with that. But if we want to come over, so let's come over to MediaBay. So we'll go ahead and open it up. So let's say we want to come over here. I want to go to and put some metadata in. So let me just come over here to documents. All right, so let's say all right, so let's say if we're just kind of selecting a particular sound here. So in the MediaBay, so when you open it up, you'll notice that there's going to be kind of a right zone. And as we do this, so we could see, okay, now when we come over here, there's lots of different attributes that are already kind of associated with it. If you wanted to add additional attributes, if you click on the little settings cogwheel here, you can see that there's a number of kind of standard attributes for metadata. So with different AES standards, So if we come over here, now if you don't see the particular attribute you're looking for, you want to make something that's kind of more attuned to where you could find, if you just click on kind of the plus sign, we could create your own attributes. So we could say, okay, do you want it to be a number, a text, a yes, no? So let's say, okay, I want it to be text, and I want it to be, I want to search for Papa Vol. All right, so so at this point, you could just kind of click on the plus sign, and then, you know, like if you're going through a bunch of loops, you could say, okay, I want to do this, you know, and make your own different attributes, and then you could search based upon those particular attributes as well. So in the MediaBay right-hand zone, and then click on the settings. You could add your own attributes or use kind of industry standard attributes right there. All right, so we have DL White checking in from Fort Worth, Texas. Thanks for joining us. Okay, Mark Brugler says, hello from Tucson, Arizona. Ran into 2 problems with templates in Cubase 14 Pro and Windows. Still getting the horn stab note cluster in each track with the orchestra template. So second template issue, used a lo-fi hip-hop template, made a song with a chord track, saved it, then reopened it, and wish to change my bitrate, etc. When I changed settings, I lost the formatting, HD to manually move chords back into place, or had to manually move chords back into place. What did I do wrong? All right, so when you're doing kind of a sample rate conversion, so let's say I come over here, I think I still had, all right, so let's say this project here is at, just check my audio connection. So say this project is at 44.1. Sorry, let me just. Okay, so just to kind of get the pitch, and let's say if I threw in some chords here, and I'll put these chords on. Measure 8, measure 12, and measure 16. Okay, so when we do a sample rate conversion, the way that I generally like to do it is, what I find kind of the cleanest method is to go to your project menu. So we'll get our bearings to now on the pitch. So these are all at 16-bit 44.1, these files. So now what I could do is go to my project setup. So let's say I want to change it to a different sample rate, such as 48K. If I hit OK, now you'll get these. Do you want to convert audio files to the new rate? We'll say yes. Do you want to keep the files in the source files in the root directory? Why not? And then you get this question: do you want to keep the audio events at their sample positions? So at this point, we probably want to say no. So if we say yes, then the audio is going to be based at the sample positions. So at this point, this is a critical one that probably messed you up. You want to choose no. And now when we do this, all the files will be same pitch, same position relative to the sample rate. So on that last query where it says you want to keep them at sample positions, make sure you choose no. I bet that would do it for you, Mark. Okay, so you see Miguel Flores says, how will it work with Dolby Atmos? So I'm not sure if that's with the panning. So let's say now that if I wanted to come over here and do Dolby Atmos, what I would need to do is just come over here. Let's get to my ADM authoring. I'll go to my setup assistant. All right, and let's say we're going to monitor binaurally. Okay, so now each track, if we're doing panning, we open up the panner. We could come over here and we'll say, okay, so here we could take our panner, move it around kind of three-dimensionally. So if this is kind of someone's definition of panorama, we could adjust our height and we can move elements around kind of a spherical field here. So we're going to have our height control as well as kind of our panning around the listening source here. So let me know if that's what you mean by how it will work in Dolby Atmos. All right. So we see Soren just says, hi Greg, I'm looking forward to Wavelab 13. The new thing seems to be workflow about Dolby Atmos. I hope there's other things also. Will you have a special run through of it here like with Cubase? We may not do a dedicated Wavelab live stream, but we'll be answering any questions. There will be more details to come out right around the NAMM show. So. All right, so we see Capo 1974 from Finland checking in. It's Daniela Tokan joining from Bochum, Germany. So I know you, Daniela, you'd asked on the live stream on Tuesday about the goniometer. So when I did my research on it, there's kind of different aspects of it. But it seemed like the phase meter was doing most of what the goniometer, and maybe it's slightly different appearance, but we'll just go ahead and show you kind of the phase meter here. So let me just open it up. All right, so I have several different phase meters here. So let's say I have like a stereo track that I've split to two different sources here. Right. So as we're kind of working, with this, let's say if we want to just take, let's do different source here quickly. Okay, let me just... Okay, so let's say I want to take this source here. I'll split this into two different channels here. So we have a stereo. So let's say we have this stereo source here. So we'll just do this one quick stereo source. Okay. So what I want to do now is I'll just come over here and let's split these. So we'll just say, okay, we'll make this let's try that. Let me just try a different file here real quick. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's say we'll take these two files here. So we have a stereo file that we split, just so. All right. So when I come over here, so what we're seeing is kind of our left-right channel. And just as we look at this, you know, if we want to just come over here, I'm going to just select the bottom channel here. So say, and if I flip the phase, we'll see this go very horizontal. And we can see kind of like which frequencies get knocked out of phase when we flip the phase. And if I only have the, let's say the right, let's say I only have the left channel playing, we can see that this goes. Or if we only have the right channel playing. And if I bring both sources, let's say that these are both hard panned, I'm going to bring these into the center. We can see that this will go almost entirely vertical. There's now we pan to the left, we see that axis, and we see to the right. And then inverting the pan, we see it go more horizontal. So when I looked up a lot of goniometers, it seemed like, and for audio applications, it seemed like it was mostly this type of meter. And you could also have kind of different representations of these. So let's say if I go to the settings, if I wanted to see it in dots, or if we wanted to see it as envelopes, then we could also just choose to zoom. So if we wanted to, but again, as I mute channels, you see that reflected. And then just come right over here. So this is a typical phase scope. This is kind of showing more of the panorama and frequencies. So there's a lot of different maybe views of goniometers, but that was a typical one that came up in my searches. So let me know if that makes sense for you. All right, move on. All right, Martin Subasic joining from Cologne, Germany. Thanks for joining us. Tim Weinheimer says, hello, Greg. I'm excited to see the new Yamaha interfaces at NAMM. So, yeah, they're pretty slick. All right, we have Peter Morris joining from London, UK. Always wonderful to see Razel's Mini from Denmark. All right, Matt Elson just says, thanks, Greg, much appreciated. Wonderful to see Mark Rabin on. Everyone give a big woof to Mark Rabin's dog, Stella. All right, so we see just a question. Hey, I'm wondering if it's worth the upgrade from 14 Pro to 15 Pro. So I think there's lots of great things in there. Obviously, Omnivocal, the writing room synths as instruments. You get new plugins, the Ultra Shaper, compressor, as well as the pitch shifter. Lots of great additions in the pattern editing, as well as, they doubled the amount of modulators, lots of little editing enhancements, automation enhancements. So I think there's lots of great new features and functions found in 15. So I think it's definitely worth an upgrade. All right. We see Peter joining from Montreal. So we're sunny but a chilly minus 27 degrees centigrade. And if you want, I just see kind of follow up to the 14 Pro and 15 Pro. So if you want, you could just say, like if we go to, let's say, online here, we did kind of an entire walkthrough kind of in detail of all of the new features. So if you just get to the Cubase YouTube channel, which we're on now, maybe it's... see if I spelled it right. All right, so, and if you want to go to the live area here, so if we go back to like November 5th, it was on my birthday, when it was released. So you'll see a Cubase 15 detailed walkthrough, so new expression maps. So this is like kind of a 2-hour walkthrough and plug-in scaling, pinch to zoom on Mac, new VST plugin manager. So this will be sampler track improvements, Groove Agent SE6, that's a huge deal. Some MIDI 2.0 enhancements. So we can see, so if you watch this live stream, that will give you kind of a walkthrough of all of the new features from 14 to 15. And there's similar walkthroughs from 13 to 14 or 12 to 13, etc. Okay, reading through comments here. All right, so you see from Marin Subasic says, hi Greg, just came back to Cubase after years under another DAW and enjoying 15 Pro very much. Got a lot of older high-end sonic libraries like Aron and others. I can't get them licensed online. So there's a lot of those that have migrated from the e-licenser to Steinberg licensing. So let me just see if I go to... I have that. So, there was kind of a transition period. So you might want to look in your My Steinberg count into the vouchers area. But let's see if I have Aron as one of my instruments. Not sure if I do. Yeah, so... I don't think I have that one installed, but check in your, if you had it licensed, you could still connect the USB-E licenser. You can't activate it now if it's a USB, but if it's activated, it will still work. But I could do some, if you want to send me a list of the libraries that you don't have working to clubcubase@steinberg.de, I'd be happy to take a look. All right, great to see Pertico Menon joining. Okay. All right, so we see Odyssey Historique. Hi, what's the difference between linear and musical mode? Consequences on audio and MIDI event. Okay, so let's come over. Let me just create a MIDI event here. Okay, so I'm going to create a MIDI event. Let's say measure 5 to 9. Okay, and this is kind of the, just enable snap quickly. All right. So when we have tracks that are in musical mode, let's say my tempo here is now set to 120 beats a minute. When a track is in musical mode, which looks like the quarter note here, the musical quarter note, and there's musical mode and linear mode. All right, so if I've recorded a project and I change my tempo from 120, let's say, to 100 beats a minute, if a track is in linear mode, its position is based on the bar and beat. Okay, so when I change from 120 to 100, this event is still going to start at measure 5. Okay, now let's say I go back to 120. That event maintains its position based on bars and beat position, and that's what musical mode is. Now we also have linear mode. So when I change this track type to linear mode, and this will be the same for audio or MIDI, when I change this to 100 to 120 beats a minute, the start of the event is going to be based on its actual time position. So I will just add a ruler track to point this out. So let's come over here to our ruler track, and I'm going to put this into seconds. Okay. So we can see that we're going to start this event at measure 5. So this is going to actually start at roughly, the event start here is at 7 seconds, 7.20. Okay. So now when I come over here, I'm going to change. Now that this track is in linear mode, I change from 100 to 120. We can see that that has shifted in the bar position. So again, if we start at measure 5 and we're at 120 beats a minute in musical mode, when I come over here, it's still at bar 5. So we go back to 120 beats a minute. And I put this into linear mode. So let's change our tempo down to 100. And it's staying at the same time position, but our time position, it's staying at the same time position, but it has moved it from its musical position. So time linear, when you do tempo changes, linear tracks will stay at their precise moment in time. Musical tracks will stay at their bar and beat position. So once you get that figured out that way, you can say, okay, this track, I always want it to have, like, I have a sound that's aligned with a scene in a movie. So I always want that note to come when the light turns on. I want this note to turn on. Now, but if I want to change the tempo, but I want that note to always come in where that light is turned on, I would have that track into linear mode so I could do a tempo change, and that event is always going to stay at that same precise moment in time. So let me know if that's helpful. All right, so Mark Rabin's just saying Jazz Dude rocks. We all know that. He's so good. Appreciate everything he does. All right, Nico Thomason just saying hello. All right, so we have Tim K joining from Zeist in the Netherlands. His cat buddy is waving a paw hello. And Stella, Buddy, Mark Rabin's dog, is giving a big woof to Buddy. See, Mark Brugler says, thanks, Greg, you're right. I should have just said no, laughing out loud. All right, Ricky Tera says, feature request, like version lanes, can we have versions for inserts and sends, like insert A and insert B, where it'll automatically bypass when not in use to save CPU, Ableton lower zone of inserts. So there's, for VST3 plugins, there's already a preference. So if the plugin isn't passing audio, if you go here to your preferences or settings, so, and you go to plugins, and you could say suspend VST3 plugin processing when no audio signals are received. So that way, the audio is not going to do any processing if it's not playing, or it's not processing or passing audio through. So, and that goes for instruments as well. So that way, if there is no activity going on, the plugins won't be utilizing audio performance. So let me know if that's helpful for you. All right, Ricky Terra says, also, could we have an insert chain in the lower zone, like Ableton? So, really all you have to do if we want to see the inserts, so say we go to our mix console here. Let me just open up kind of a larger project. Okay, so if we come over here, you'll see like a little... if you go to all right, so if you want to just see like all the inserts in the bottom zone, there is a function. So if we right click here, we could just say, I usually do it from my Stream Deck, but I'll show you where it's at here. But we could choose to hide the faders. Let me see if it's in the... Let me just see if there's... Here, I'll just connect my Stream Deck real quick. But basically, you could choose in the lower zone. me just see if it's... Okay, so it's here. So when you go to the setup window and you could assign a keyboard shortcut, you could just choose to hide the faders, and then you could see all of your inserts and sends, and then, you know, one keyboard shortcut away, you could just come over here and show the faders. So if you have, like, you know, 16 inserts, you could see your inserts and sends all directly here in the lower zone mixer. So just you program to just hide the faders right there, and it's keyboard shortcut, or you can do it from a MIDI remote. So that way the insert chain is in the lower zone. So let me know if that's helpful for you. So again, just go to the setup window and hide the faders. There used to be like 3 icons here where you can see the sends, inserts, or faders. But now the full mixer is there, so you can just hide the faders and see inserts and sends at once, which is helpful. Okay. Okay, so Mark Raven's just passing on, probably learned something he learned with the MSI laptops is he says if you have an MSI laptop or MSI hardware, check for Nahimic or Avalet. These are seriously problematic. Remove them. All right. All right, so we see from Bratman Studio, it says, Greg, I'm curious about the phase meter. What is the goal? Lots of times it looks like a cotton candy machine. What am I reading with all the frequencies, and when do I know it's best sounding? So, you know, generally if we were to come over, let's say if you're recording like a stereo source, like, you know, it could be a keyboard, but let's say you're using 2 microphones. Right, and like acoustic guitar or piano, very typical, or overheads on drums. So Rick, you're a drummer, you'll appreciate overheads on drums. So let's come over, and as we have our, so if, you know, let's say the microphones are slightly different distances, so the sound hits one microphone slightly before the other microphone when you hit this cymbal or you hit the snare drum. The snare is going into the snare mics, probably the tom mics, and the overheads. But let's say the overhead, your right overhead is like, you know, 1/4 inch higher than the left overhead. So when we'll come over here, and when you see stuff like that is, so let's say I want to, we'll open up our phase scope here. All right, so I'm going to just slide this start position here of this one track. So we're playing these 2 tracks together. And you hear how when I just change the start position ever so slightly, so I'll just keep changing the start position here. So this is kind of almost like taking the waveform and we're looking at it, we're kind of rotating the waveform from the front, and we're going 90 degrees and looking at this side of the waveform. So if we come over here, as we do this, this is kind of a healthy kind of phase relationship. So you think of this as our audio waveform. But again, we're going to take this waveform and we're going to say we're looking at it now. We're going to rotate it 90 degrees and we're looking at the side of the waveform. So this is the left channel. This is the right channel. So when you see phase, you know, and people often in DAWs will correct it manually. So if you zoom in let's say on your tracks, I'll hide my lower zone, where one track is going to be like going up in amplitude. So let's go ahead and start these all kind of at the same time. All right, so let's say we zoom in here. All right, so you may have tracks like a stereo track where it's going to be going up in one channel, and if it's going down in the other channel, so if we kind of invert the phase, we see that when it's going on a positive axis, we could have that just invert and go down to the negative axis, and we'll call this polarity to be a little more accurate, but people often use phase and polarity interchangeably. So if one sound is going up and the other sound is going down, that would cancel out and make it sound kind of weak. So that way the two channels are kind of fighting each other. So when the energy is positive in one channel, it's negative in the other channel. So the phase scope is good at finding those instances to make sure your mix is relatively in phase with your different parts. So, check any of your stereo sources. Like you want to make sure, and some people, like a classic Glyn Johns method was, he would have a kick drum mic and he would use 3 mics. And then they would have one mic that was kind of above the snare drum and one mic that was to the right of like the drummer's right shoulder. And how they would measure the distance between the 2 mics is they would often take 2 drumsticks and stack them on top of each other. That was their measurement, just a quick measurement that everyone has. So you can say, this is 2 drumsticks above the mic. Now, when I rotate those 2 drumsticks and we put it like, 2 or 3 drumsticks over my, towards my right shoulder, that way when the sound hits, it's hitting the sound of both microphones at the same time. And that's what you want to, and that's kind of what the phase scope will show you. So when you have, the phase scope being kind of very narrow, so again, if I flip the phase, we see it go more horizontal and it sounds a little less impact. And what we're seeing here is which frequencies are out of phase. So when these are red, these are just showing the particular frequencies. So if I was listening to an entire mix and I see, okay, just the low frequencies are problematic, that could mean like if I recorded my bass and I did a microphone and took a DI signal, that, the sound coming out of the DI may be slightly ahead of the sound being captured by the microphone going through the amplifier. That's a longer path and it has to be captured. So a lot of times, if your bass sounds weak and you recorded a mic, like a mic to amp and a DI, you just simply take and try flipping the phase to make sure that, the 2 channels aren't canceling each other out. Because when one is going up and one is going down, it's then basically saying, oh, I don't trust you. You don't know what you're doing. So ideally you want the phase to, both be going in the same direction. So it's a quick little lesson on phase. All right, so we see, do you use the goniometer or phase meter on the master bus? Greg, you can. I'm just doing I could do it in the control room or on the master bus. You'll get kind of the same setting. So if I come here, so let's go to my mixer. So we'll go to our analyzer, supervision. So again, when I flip the phase here, see it goes more horizontal, and you hear how it kind of sounds like wider. And sometimes, you know, people use that as an effect. That's what a phaser is doing. But now if I come here, we're going to hear the mix kind of come more into focus. So again, if we were to take this waveform and kind of rotate it 90 degrees, this is kind of what we're looking at here. So you can put it in a master fader. A lot of people put it in a master fader because their software doesn't have a control room monitoring path. So, and if you put it into master fader, you might, you know, have to put it into the last effect slot, so you're actually seeing the result of the phasing of any phase anomalies introduced by plugins, and if you have plugins on a master bus. Right. Let's see, Parbs 198 says there's too much life in this mix for modern mastering. It all needs to be separated, sidechained, and sued with 10 plugins per track. All right. All right, so we see how to see in the goniometer Cubase hyper compression. The EQ view is cool. All right, so usually, you know, phase is going to be kind of more, you know, you may not. So let's say if I kind of squash it, it's already pretty squashed already. But let's say if I put this, so we'll open up this phase meter here. So I will put in, let's say, in our stereo here. So it's usually kind of more kind of, you know, like the left-right balance. So, you know, if you're doing, we can see that we have a little less amplitude. And you can see where it's kind of, so if we just kind of super compress it. And I'll just kind of switch this to our default lines here. And then we could also zoom. Or auto zoom. So if I kick the compressor on, that's going to affect the dynamic range, and we'll see that reflected. So you can almost see where some of the transients kind of sneaking through. Now I bypass the compressor. So again, bypass. Now I'll come over here and we'll just flip the phase and put the compression on. And now we'll invert the polarity here, back. So for, you know, looking for phase issues, and a lot of engineers I know, you know, will have, you know, like some old school engineer friends of mine, you know, when, you know, they would have hardware pieces sitting on top of the console, and what it would show, and these were expensive hardware pieces, is they would have one that would be a spectrum bar kind of showing frequencies. So it would come here. And then here they would have a separate piece of hardware that was routed through like the control room part, and this would just be a phase scope. So anytime that they make a change when they're recording, they always have an idea to make sure like frequencies aren't building up and that the phase. So these were very, very common things to have, and often these were, you know, like probably fewer bands, like on the Spectrum bar. So, you know, might have been, that's a pretty typical like Spectrum analyzer that people would have. And they would just have this constantly on, just as kind of like, you know, whenever they kind of did something that they knew that could be affecting phase, or what frequency is something was building up that they wanted to EQ, then they could just come right over here and, you know, see, you know, those two things. So those were kind of very common things that people like, you know, I'm thinking my friend Nelson Funk, who did a bunch of the James Brown records in the day, like in the 60s, did all the big James Brown records, and, you know, in his room he still has this, you know, this phase scope and like the little Spectrum display, and that's how, you know, and he's won, you know, way more Emmys than I'll ever win. So just a wonderful engineer, very old school, and that's how he would do it. So all right, I can't. Looking forward to Mark Rabin's, listening to Mark Rabin's release. So thanks for putting us in the liner notes. It means a lot. Okay. All right, so we have Alex signing in from the Mojave Desert. Thanks for joining us. All right. So FlyV just says, how long after new Cubase release does Splice take to put it on their website? So I'm not sure, you know, what the length is. So I thought it was pretty quick on 14. So I'm not sure if you want to reach out to Splice and see if maybe they could give an answer on that. I will be seeing my colleagues next week. I'll be doing some appointments with them on Monday in Los Angeles. So I could probably find out then if you want to send me a brain cramp email reminder. Okay. All right. So we have Costas Linus joining from Greece. Thanks for joining in. All right. All right, so we see from Daniela, says I do mostly identification and hypercompression to get more dynamics in room, and I identify in the master the optimum wide of a mix before it starts to phase too much. If you go wider in the mix, so you know, so let's say if I come over here and I just put on, you know. All right, so let's say, you know, as we're looking at, let's say, our supervision here, and if I go to my master bus here, so let's put on like an Imager plugin, and you notice that when you have the Imager plugin, that you have like a basic phase scope that's going on here. So let's say if I just come over here to my outputs, and I just increase the width. So just by increasing the width on those frequencies, we can see that when we take those frequencies, I'm going to just spread out the width of this one frequency band. And as we adjust that phase, we see that represented right here. If I turn on, adjust my width of this band, we'll see probably up here these particular frequencies. So up here, and if we turn this band on, so when you do widening, that's going to affect the phase, and that's why sometimes people will have a multi-band imager, so you could do, you don't want like the low end to be out of phase, because that could really kind of disrupt the foundation of your mix. So we could say, I just want kind of the highs here to be wider without affecting kind of the impact of the low frequencies. So, and that's why you see in the multi-band imager, like the imager plugin, why it has a little phase scope, just to give you kind of a reference for that. All right. All right, so we see Mark Raven's release is going to be on January 30th. Okay. All right, so we have Flavio Franco Rajo just saying hi, Greg. So, all right, and his question is it possible to transform audio and MIDI files? So if you want to take audio and turn it into MIDI, so it's kind of set up currently for monophonic sources. So if I have something, let's come over here to this. So it's not going to, if you want to convert audio into MIDI, so it gets to be tricky and a bit more unreliable when you're doing kind of polyphonic stuff like that has chords. But let's say if I want to come here to this, and we'll listen to let's check my audio connections one more time. Sorry about that. So if I want to come here, we could go into Very Audio. So like saxophone, vocals, bass often. And then you'll see this. We come right over here, we'll say functions, and then we could say extract MIDI. And now if we wanted to look at the MIDI notes of our bass part, so, and if you wanted to do like for drum replacement, where you could, so again, that is going in, double clicking. You want to go into Very Audio. And then once it's done its analysis, you'll see like choose function. Then you could extract MIDI. If it's going to be for maybe like, drum replacement, you could come over here and we could go to the hit points tab. And say, okay, I want to, so we could adjust kind of our threshold. So if I wanted to replace like these audio kicks with kicks from a, groove agent, I could come over here. Let's say, okay, let's just do, I want to turn these into MIDI notes. And we could choose, okay, I want this to be on C1. We could retain our dynamic velocities. And then we could just say, okay, let's put it on our first selected track. And at that point, we could just have our kicks automatically labeled for us here. So if I drag this to... So 2 different ways of doing audio to MIDI, but let me know if I misunderstood, because I think it was probably in a different language that I don't speak well. All right, wonderful to see John Costigan joining from Kenosha, Wisconsin. See Bratman Studio talking about NAMM, says it's a bit of a different learning experience for him, but he does enjoy all the drums. Usually buys some new drum gadget or MIDI device. Yeah, NAMM is kind of the world's biggest music store. All right. All right, read through comments. See, Mark Rabin says, Greg, I think I need to correct you. Mark Rabin is owned and trained by Stella. So. Okay, more comments reading through. Okay, so you see from Ricky Terra, sorry if I misunderstood, says I meant I could quickly change the plugin chain and plugins chain version lanes kind of thing. So one of the things that you could do if you have like different plugin chains, so let's say if I come here and I will come over, let's just find some. Okay, so let's say I have just come over here to presets, get track presets. All right, so let's say if I come here, if we go into the mixer, so let's go to our mix console here. I'm going to select, let's say, the bass part. All right, let me just. All right, so we see this little camera here. All right, so we could save a mix console snapshot. So, all right, and let's say I have a different plugin chain. Okay, so then what I could do is take a snapshot here. Then I could just come over here. Let's go to the recall settings. So you could say, let's just come over here. I want it for the selected channels. And I just want my inserts. So now at this point, I only have, let's say, my bass part selected. Then I can say, okay, let's recall snapshot. And let me just make sure let's say I'll take this out and let's take snapshot. Oh, sorry, if I just come here, we could just go back and forth between snapshots on that particular mixer. So if I want to come here, let's take a snapshot. So now I can say, okay, let's get to snapshot 3, snapshot 4, snapshot 1. So this way you could try out different chains and just simply recall them like that. So sorry for misunderstanding your question. All right, so you see, hey Greg, DaVinci Girl brought up an interesting thing. What does Cubase have built in for people with vision problems? And is it all about OS? So OS has a lot to do with it, but you could go through. Sometimes people need high contrast materials, high contrast settings. So if you come over to your settings, you could come over here and just, I know people that, I have poor vision myself and, had multiple eye surgeries over years, but here we could choose to, when we go to general colors, we could change if you wanted to use, different color schemes for things. So a lot of times when you go to background colors for the editor, for the project window, so if I want it to be like a really bright, I need high contrast for stuff like that, we could set that type of thing up. We also do lots of work with, to make sure, lots of our users, Stevie Wonder, Greg Lukens, we have a number of blind users that, utilize Cubase, with screen readers as well, and the ability of setting up keyboard shortcuts. The reason that we had user assignable keyboard shortcuts was to, because we were making special, like we would add, like create a Stevie Wonder build of Cubase at one point, because he needed, like at one point he needed to be able to change a track into like a drum track for the drum editor, and he couldn't do that non-visually. So we added a keyboard shortcut, and then in discussion with, one of the guys that helps him set up his systems, Rob Arbiter, a good friend of mine, everyone kind of came to the conclusion that, if something that's better for someone who's blind or is visually impaired is also better for someone that sees as well. So that's why you have the ability of, customizing keyboard shortcuts to do kind of whatever function and creating macros to get around different user case scenarios. So, all right, wonderful to see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas. All right, so we see Capo 1974 just says, I wish there was an option to invert the whole color scheme, not the files and parts in the project window, but all the backgrounds, menus, and other Cubase related flashback to 90s. So, if you're doing, within the operating system on Mac and PC, Cubase, will adhere to dark and light modes within the operating system as well. So that will take care of menus. So a lot of stuff you could do, you may have to kind of set it up and tweak it. Or you see Michael Teams is granted Jazz Dude 1 gallon of Cherry's Jubilee ice cream. All right, so we see from Capo 1974, it says I kind of like the Atari Cubase simpleness, black and white, more white in the interface. I don't want it to be black and white, but these modern interfaces are very dark. It's also, the modern interfaces also allow you to work at that particular, it's much easier for eye strain working kind of with, and why you see so many programs kind of navigate to more darker themes is because it's, you know, easier for eye strain and working for long hours at a time. So, you know, when I first kind of started running, like as the GUIs kind of became darker, you know, when I go back to like an earlier Cubase version, sometimes I'm just like, turn down the lights, you know, it seems too bright, so I could really kind of focus on key elements like the names, you know, and, you know, when what is selected versus not selected. So they do a lot of research on having kind of the highest contrast for easier visibility. All right, wonderful to see Val on. From Vienna. All right. All right, we see Gerald Ely just says, hey, Cubasers can't stay, but I stopped in and hit the like. I'll be watching a stream later today. Thanks for all that you do. Greg, enjoy NAMM. So, thanks for the kind words. Hope to see you on next Zoom meetup. Okay, reading through comments here. So we see from Tim K says, remember the monochrome amber and worse, the monochrome green. Hashtag things I don't miss. You're not the only one whose eyes aren't the baseline. So. Yeah, those are pretty uninspiring. All right. All right, so you see from Bratman Studio, I think it's a comment on the phase scope. It says, thanks, Greg. Long time since recording, school, college. Basically, tighter and vertical in the dots is better overall. I noticed in your example, which was a little more volume in left, bent to the left side. So, yeah, I think I just grabbed the clip gain. So. All right, so we see from Soren says, Greg, it seems the Steinberg built-in ASIO driver has buffer size 480 for me. Can I get it to 512 and do Atmos with it? You should be able to, but usually the Steinberg built-in, if you have like, I'm not sure if you are intending to use it with your UR22C. So, you know, usually the built-in ASIO driver, and it's different on Mac, but when you go here, the Steinberg built-in ASIO driver is an ASIO driver for like the built-in hardware on the motherboard of your computer or your laptop that often people, you know, connect headphones to. But if you have a UR22C, which I think you have, at that point you could use the Yamaha Steinberg USB driver, and that would allow you to get, but you should be able to just kind of come over here and go to the device panel and adjust your buffer size. So I think even with the Steinberg built-in ASIO, that you could just simply utilize that and change the buffer size. Unless for some reason that audio interface doesn't support that buffer size. Most do. I think it should be fine. All right, so you see from DaVinci Girl says my teacher is close to 80 years old and has 40 years experience. I like vintage gear lots. So. see, Val just says, he recently had the honor of having to attend a video call with Greg Wells. Wow, what a guy. Do all Gregs know each other? So, I don't think I know Greg. All right. All right, so we see George checking in from Germany. He just says, how can I listen to Mark Rabin's music? So hopefully, I think it'll be out on the 30th. All right, we have Steve Leeds sending greetings from Berkeley, California. All right, Steve Green asks, hi Greg, let's say I have collected an audio sample of a dog barking. How and where in Cubase can I store it for easy access for future projects? So if you had something like that, let's see. May have some sound effects. Let me see if I could. Okay, so let's say I come over here. Apologize to Stella, probably wigged her out. All right, so let's say I come here, and this is our dog barking sound. So I'm going to, it's just, so let's say we have this file. I would probably just go to the sampler control here, drag and drop it. We'll go to our presets. So we'll say, okay, let's save a track preset. We'll call it dog bark. Now let's go to a new project 6 months later. Okay, and I'm coming over here. Let's go to our presets. Let's go to track presets, and we'll go to sampler, or I guess we'll make it into our user presets, track presets, sampler, and then here's our dog bark. So when I drag that over, I can now, so you could do, and just have kind of instant access to it, right like that. So you could save it in a sampler track. If it's just in an audio file and you have it in MediaBay, you could also recall it just from MediaBay. So again, if you come right over here, you can go to your MediaBay. If you called it, you know, so let's say, okay, I'm looking for bark. And then if, as long as it's one of the folders, you can now just come over here and say I'm looking for an audio file. And then you can see all of your different audio files of dogs barking, stuff like that. So, but if you wanted to have quick access, you can save it as a track preset with as a sampler track. All right, so we have Michael Marshall joining from Somerset in the UK. Thanks for joining us. We have Soul Sound Official joining as well. All right, Michael Teams is granted Soren 1 gallon of strawberry ice cream. And Mark Graves received 1 gallon of chocolate cherry mash. Daniela and Wilfried received 1 gallon of pistachio mint ice cream. We see Wilfried's working at the hospital. Okay. See, Da Vinci Girl says she uses a Braille screen reader too. So Michael Teams asks, howdy Greg, it appears when recording MIDI, it really comes in hot. How to lower the volume of the inputs. So generally MIDI is not going to record hot. MIDI is going to send a message to an instrument, and maybe that instrument is recording hot. So let's say if I go to an instrument track here, all right, so we have the ballotine. So, when depending on the instrument itself, now check the actual instrument track. So, when you come, you could obviously, so you're going to have dynamics in the velocity, but if we just lower the volume on a particular track, so I'm not sure if you're starting from a track preset, or because usually the default volume when adding an instrument track is going to be like, I think it's going to be at 0. So let's say, okay, let's come to retrolog. So I think it's going to default to 0 dB. So, but check just, because it's usually not MIDI that's doing it. If I play, in some instruments, like no matter how soft you hit it, like by design. So if I come over here, let's say in retrolog, I could just adjust my velocity control here. So if I hit it soft, that will automatically respond. So it could be the instrument itself is kind of designed to be loud in its default state, but you could always just bring down the volume of the instrument track, but that's usually at 0 dB to kind of start with. So all right, so we see from Da Vinci Girl says, this is the first time the GUI looks much better for me. Can you let it for live streaming? It's much better. Cubase, now I see something. Thanks, Greg. As long as you know that you could achieve that, you can get your Cubase set up for, to look that way. I usually try to leave stuff for live streams to kind of the default settings. But if you have issues with, figuring out how to get the backgrounds, to be white, brighter, or darker, you could reach out to me via email to clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, wonderful to see Beverly Beatty joining from Vancouver. All right, we see Brian Sawyer joining from Yuma, Arizona. All right, so we see from Delsar Music says, thank you for answering my questions, Greg. Are you going to upgrade your CC121 to the new CC1? I think I may try to use both of them kind of in concert, in connection with each other. My CC121 I've had, 18 years, since 2008. So it's literally like it's my Cubase left hand. So it's a lot of muscle memory. I do like the fader and the CC1 personally better. I have a bigger Stream Deck, so I have the Stream Deck XL. So I'm gonna try to incorporate it into into my live stream, into my office and my personal computer system as well. So, but yeah, I think it's pretty slick and feels nice, and also has like a foot switch input, which is handy. So. All right, Steve Green asks, hi Greg, thanks. Where's the MediaBay folder stored on a PC so I can save an audio file to it? So it's really, the MediaBay isn't really its own folder. What MediaBay does is it accesses other folders. When you go to MediaBay, you could actually just see this computer. So you could come over and say, okay, on this computer, in, my users, into whatever folder I want to go to, documents, and into, projects. So as soon as I come over here, we could just simply pick and choose whatever particular folder that we want. So you could just place a check mark. So you don't put anything into a special folder in MediaBay. MediaBay, you can specify what folders MediaBay looks into. So basically, you could just say, okay, MediaBay, I don't need MediaBay when I'm in Cubase to look at my tax documents or pictures maybe, or, poetry I'm writing, whatever. So you could just simply tell Cubase which folders tell MediaBay which folders to look for on your particular system. And anything that it has access to, you could just type in Bark, and it could be in any folder on your system, and it would look for audio files regardless of the folder, as long as it's addressable through MediaBay. All right, Uno Memento is saying hi to Brian Sawyer. All right, so we have Soul Sound Official. It says, hi, Greg. When having multiple mono tracks for recording vocals, when want to send them all to a stereo group and treat them as a whole, how does the signal works? Plus 3 dB and insert or stereo works for mono. All right, so let me just open up. Project with some background vocals here. Okay, so here I have kind of a whole series of background vocals. All right, let's make sure it's sounding respectable.
To kiss my face, the world was like a brand new place. Felt my fears all fly away.
All right.
Don't it make you feel good? Knowing that somebody
All right, so I have kind of this whole folder.
Don't it make you feel good? Knowing that somebody wants to.
Right, and these are all currently, I'll just take these and I'm going to send them to a new group. So I'll hold down my shift, select these tracks, and what we want to do now is I'm going to just say, let's add our track, and we're going to add it to a group track. Okay, so these are all mono, and we'll call this Vox Group.
Make you feel good. Knowing that somebody loves you.
All right, so now if we wanted to do processing on this group, I could say, okay, let's, all right, so we'll come over here, so let's add some delays. So let's say I'll just add some new ones here. So we'll just right click here, let's just add. All right. And we'll add a little. So now, so we could do this. Now, it could be that when you're just change my delay time here. And then if you want to go to the channel strip and just put a little glue in there. So now sometimes if you run into scenarios where sometimes when you're doubling sounds, it could, you know, if you take two sources and you have like twice, like one singer versus two, it could go up in volume by 3 dB. Now, if you needed to accommodate any volume changes, like due to kind of panning law, that's where you could come here into the project setup or hit Shift plus S for setup. And then at this point, you could just say, okay, we want to actually see our stereo pan law so that as we pan, that we can make sure that if we wanted it to be even, or if we wanted to, so you could set it to, minus 6 dB, minus 4.5, minus 3, or 0 dB, so it's going to be consistent wherever you kind of do panning. All right. All right, so Bratman Studio says, I was wondering if you know what your schedule will be at NAMM. Is there a better time to come by? Daytime. Also, who else is going to NAMM? So I will be mostly, there's an area called the Content Creator section or the Creators Lounge. I'm going to be in there primarily. It's part of the show that, if you don't have a creator badge from NAMM, that you might have to be escorted in. So Rick, if you want to email me, if you wanted to email me and say, I'm going to be at the show this day, we could set up an appointment and I could, have you go in, or we can meet outside of that particular room. So it won't be any like public presentations, but I'll be doing mostly kind of one-on-ones in the Creators Lounge and hang out in there. All right, Michael Teams is granted Brian Sawyer 1 gallon of chocolate cream pie ice cream. All right, so we see Michael Pierce on. Says he's hobbling around at home mixing this week. Loving to look at the new Yamaha controller, by the way. It's great. I hope you're recovering well. All right. All right, so we see Space Baby 1174 just says MediaBay points to audio. So MediaBay points to audio, but it also points to a lot of other components as well. So anything that's kind of really kind of relevant for your Cubase production. So when you go to MediaBay here, not only can we do audio files, but MIDI files, MIDI loops, patterns, and that could be like patterns for the pattern editor, track presets, plugin presets, effects chain presets, channel strip presets, video files, and projects themselves. So there's lots of kind of relevant files that could be accessed in MediaBay directly for not just audio files. See, Brian's not going to make it out to NAMM. His wife's having surgery on her foot. She's going to be down for 4 weeks. We hope your wife has a speedy recovery. Wish her well for us. All right. Let's see. Michael Teams has granted Michael Pierce, the Button Man, 1 gallon of peppermint mocha ice cream. All right. Michael Teams has granted me 1 gallon of Andy's chocolate mint ice cream. His new flavors are so good. Thank you, Michael. My mother-in-law is visiting from Pasadena, so she'll enjoy that as well. All right, so we see from Daniela, says wonderful, I love this choir and voices. All right. All right, so we see from Michael Pierce says, by the way, the link to Yamaha Music London from the UK Yamaha site, find a dealer is wrong, doesn't work. It says hashtag finder's fee. I'll see if I see anyone from, I don't know a lot of people at the Yamaha. I'm trying to think who I know is. I knew people that were, Yamaha had an R&D office in London. I knew a lot of those people. But I'll see if I can mention it to people at the show who could help with that. So Graham Witchers downloaded the latest Hot Mess release. He's been listening to it. All right, let me get to some questions that were mailed in. All right, so we had a question. Can you please go over the root key function in Windows Cubase 15 Pro? Okay, so let me just go to a new window as opposed to that one. All right, so if you don't see the root key, like when you're kind of starting a particular project, so I'm going to come over, let's just add an audio track. 2. Okay, so let's say I'm building a song and I want to utilize the project root key. All right, so a lot of times when we're working with audio loops that are kind of tonal in nature, so let's say I'll first start off with maybe a drum loop here. So let's say grit and grime here. All right, so all right, so I'm going to add that particular drum loop. All right, so I'm going to copy this here. We'll do 8 bars of that. All right, so let's say now I want to find like a bass sound, okay? Now, when we come over here, we could have what we call, and you may have to just right click. If you don't see the project root key, kind of right click in this area, and then you want to activate root key. Okay, so let's say as we're playing this, I want my root key to be, let's say, okay, so I'm going to drag this into my project here. Okay, now a lot of times when you look at a particular, you may get kind of like tonality. So you see B flat minor in the name of the loop. So I'm going to come over here and let's go ahead and just copy that over. All right, so we have our project root key and it's assumed it from the audio file. But let's say I want to switch it from A sharp or B flat to A natural. So when I do this, we hear that it's transposed down. So if I go to E, when it goes, so say we go up to A. So now when we kind of do this, now we could also, when we see this, one thing to be aware of is follow global transpose is also right here next to the root key. So when I select this, we could say, okay, global transpose, I want to follow. So we say, now I'm going to look for a different loop. So let's say guitar. Now we see that this is probably in a different key, but we could also just say, you know, we're going to follow our project root key, which is currently set to B flat. And now as I audition, that will automatically transpose to match. So now if we want to go up to change our key, now all these particular tracks. So if we don't want, like, now we could also kind of do this so we can see our root key. If you don't see the particular root key, just kind of right click and then you could choose the root key and whether you want the events to follow the root key or not. And where we see this, you know, follow the transpose track. So let's say if I'm doing this whole piece and we're like, okay, I want to now have this automatically, we add something called a transpose track. So if I right click, I could just come right over here and say, okay, we're going to play. And let's say when we go here, we're going to transpose up. And we could just set this in semitones. So say, okay, I want to go up 5. I want to go down. And let's say up 2 here. So we'll go back to our tonic, our root key. So now when we do this, we can say all these tracks. Now I may not want the drums to actually pitch up and down based on. So if I come to my drums, we could choose for this to follow. But I may not want the drums to actually follow. So let's say if I want this to be independent, I would just choose independent on the follow on the global transpose. So now while this is going to be going through different transpositions, my drums won't transpose, but my kind of melodic, my tonal based loops will transpose. So when you set the root key, you get audition through the project root key if it's defined here in the MediaBay, and that way loops that are kind of with different root keys. So if you have like a loop in A and a loop in B flat that you want to use, you don't have to manually transpose. Once the root key is defined, you drop it into the project, then it's going to work. But if you don't see the root key or the global transpose, at that point just simply right click to open up the settings and make sure that they're enabled with a check mark. Okay, let's see, the next point's on the transpose track. Let's see if we covered that. It says also in the same video you draw a transpose track. This is working for me. However, what do you do then to not include the track in transpose, such as I don't want my kick drum or loop to raise up 2 or 3 values as it changes the pitch on everything in one go. So again, with that, you want to select your drums or your MIDI events and make sure that the global transpose follow global transpose. Make sure that's visible, and then you want to set that to be independent, and that way it's not going to automatically follow the transposition based from the transpose track. All right. It says I have maybe an issue with my DAW controller to Tascam Model 12. The first 3 faders stopped responding with Mackie control. In Cubase, I've narrowed it down to the Mackie control script. The MIDI remote I created long ago works in those faders, though it doesn't properly work, which is why I used a Mackie control. The solo and mute buttons work normally. The record and enable button on channel 1 does not work. So channels 1, 2, and 3 faders in channel 1, record and enable, stopped working. I've done all the usual restarting, reloading, deleting, trying multiple projects, and even a firmware update on the Tascam. Cubase 15 Pro iMac M3 with Sonoma 14.5, attached some screenshots. So with this, usually I would check, and I may have gotten an email response maybe like during the live stream, but when we have a MIDI remote, so there may be like a user-generated Mackie control, but make sure, one, that you, like when you come over here, if you're running as Mackie control, that you have the right inputs and outputs that are being configured there. And also, like once you go to the MIDI remote, so these are kind of two separate systems that are kind of doing the same thing. We think of like the Mackie control and generic MIDI remote as being kind of more legacy based. What's more kind of contemporary workflows, I think, is the MIDI remote, but we know that people have set up a lot of time configuring generic remotes. So we don't want to just kind of chop that off. But when utilizing kind of just the MIDI remote, if you have everything kind of set up here, what I would do, is just come over to the mapping page and just check all of the routings for the mapping page. So here is where you could say, okay, I'm going to click on a particular button. So what does this button do? So I could hit that button, and then we could assign all the parameters that, for the functionality and the functions that we could assign for that particular button. So when I come over here, I could just say, okay, when I hit this button, I could just double click and assign this function. Now, once we have that set, really just make sure that all of your settings here are assigned as you expect. So it sounds to me like maybe it's just the mapping might have gotten affected somehow, or maybe, and you could have, various mapping pages as well. So, so really kind of check the mapping actions that you've defined there. And it kind of sounds like maybe the mapping actions got altered. All right, so we have, hi Greg, the new pattern editor is not behaving as expected. Using the pattern editor in melodic mode, I'm supposed to be able to drag a chord in from the chord track and have the pattern editor do something with it. In the pattern editor inspector, I activate the option for chords, drag a chord in from the chord track, but nothing happens in the chord option in the inspector, turns itself right back off. All right, so let's take a look. Do new project here. Okay, we'll make it pattern event. All right, so we'll go to our pattern editor. All right, and we'll choose melodic. All right, so right now we have, let's say, I don't have any scale. So when we look at this, it's chromatic. Let's see if it's set up to, yeah, so it's chromatic as we see this. So let me come over here and add a chord track. Okay, so let's make it a D major chord. Okay. So we're in polyphonic mode. All right. All right, so we're going to say chord input. So now when I come over here, I'm just going to drag that D major chord. And as we do this, we could see, okay, that as we look at it, we can see now we are basically in a D major scale. So it's changed this. All right, so let's put in F major chord, so that would be different tonalities. Say, you know, 2 sharps versus 1 flat. So when we come over here to, let's say, our chord input, so we see our notes here currently. So this would be kind of D major. All right, so let's change this. I'm going to drag and drop the chord. And now we can see that we are going to be in F. So let's say we go to our chord input, drag it in. All right, so when we come back over here, let's say if we go back to our D major, so we drag that in, we see that these particular, so we're using the chord as kind of the rhythmic basis for that. So let's come over here and just say, okay, I want to and now when we want to start building more melodic harmonies based on this, we could say, okay, let's go to, if we wanted to, say we go to our lane controls, so we could, and again, just come over here and say, okay, while we're in poly mode, we could say, okay, let's just try different. And let's go ahead and just say I want to go back where I was originally, say here, and then we could click to add voices. And then we could also choose to kind of tie all notes. But again, this would all be based around a tonality of the chord that was dragged in. And then even if we want this, we can now just kind of randomize. And if we want to adjust the density. So it's really just kind of utilizing the particular chord from the chord track as kind of the harmonic basis so that we're not just playing chromatically with that. So it kind of gives you a starting point with that. All right, let me jump back to see if we have other live questions. Again, you can always mail questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. So we see Michael Pierce is saying the CC1 isn't available in the UK for at least from Thomann for 45 weeks. Generally saw it and pulled out my debit card. Yeah, so I know it's available in shipping in the US, so it might be a little quicker. I don't know. I'm not really privy to what Thomann stocking is, but it is shipping in the US, and usually Yamaha's pretty good about having, when they do a launch, so that all the materials, all the inventory is in dealer channel. So you see Mark Rabin's back for a couple minutes. See Bratman Studio just says home to see the Yamaha ModiX M7 keys. It's supposed to have a straight in the Cubase setup from the knobs to directly control the DAW to set all the knobs to affect Cubase parameters. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that from probably my colleagues Tony Esqueda or Blake Angelos. Okay. All right, so we have Balsa checking in from Montenegro. Thanks for joining us today. All right, Balsa is asking, does archiving tracks save include folders that the tracks are in? It can if I think what you could do is archive the folder. So let's go give it a try. All right, so let's say I want to export. I'm going to activate this project, and let's say I have all my drum tracks here in a particular folder. Okay, so I'm going to export selected tracks. Not the events, sorry. I'll put it on desktop. Okay, so now I'm going to do a new project. And let's import the track archive. So we export selected tracks, we import a track archive. So here's our January 16th. I'll select all. So we can see that the folder and its particular tracks are automatically imported all together. And if you had those going to an effects send to a group, those, and you selected the effects send in a group, those could all be saved together. See, Beverly Beatty just says, thank you so much, Greg. Fantastic. Welcome. All right, so we see Raw Justice Hip Hop checking in from Capitol Heights, Maryland. All right, Track Quest Music says, hi, Greg. I just want to say, go Canes. All right. Wonderful to see Gareth On from Bilbao, Spain. All right, so we see from Soul Sound Official says on frequency plugin settings, the slope is set to 0 dB per octave, and other companies are setting it to 4.5 dB per octave. I like it at 0 and want no change to the signal. Can you explain what is it? So let's take a look. Okay, so let's say we have our frequency EQ open. All right, we'll get it out of. All right. So I'm not sure if you mean by the slope like the Q. So let's say if we come over here, so you say the slope is set to, you know, so I'm not sure if this is what you mean by the slope. Let me just reread it. Okay, the slope is set to 0 dB per octave, and other companies are setting it to 4.5. So let me know if this is like the slope you're referring to. So you could have kind of very, you know, if you want it to be wider or narrower as you're doing EQs, and it could also be if you wanted to do notch, you know, just to notch out particular frequencies. So as you come over here, and your gain, so you know, there's different EQ algorithms. So if you want to do like a high shelf or low shelf, or you know, if you want to do peak, which you could think of more as parametric, but if you need it to be tighter, you could, you know, just set it to a notch frequency as well. So let me know if that's what you're kind of referring to. All right, great to see Randy Lee Music on. All right, Sable Winters, wonderful to have you on. All right. All right, so we see from Soul Sound Official, it says it's on frequency, top right setting toggle button. Okay. Okay, so I think this is with the spectrum display. So as we're playing back, let me just put this on a group channel. I'll route all these to a group. Okay, so let's say I'll go back just to the original here. Alright, I'll just revert this quickly. Alright. Alright, so we'll come over here. Let's open up the frequency. Alright, so this is going to be like this particular slope here. So let's say if we come over and adjust our slope up. So here we could so I think it's just referring to the slope of the visual display here. Let's say we'll take off our bar graph. So here we can see left and right channels, or just a single channel. I think it's going to be just maybe, let's see if we zoom in a little more. If we could, but I think it's just going to be for maybe the angle of the slope here. I could do some more research on it, but I think it's just going to be for the visual display of the spectrum. Okay. So Sable says, does Cubase 14 to 15 Pro have the ability to detect vocal range on a Vox track? If not, that would be a useful feature. So if you want to figure out like what particular notes are in the vocal, I mean, you could use the very audio for that. So let's say if I want to quick. So let's say, so you can see kind of the range here just looking at it visually in so if we want to look at like that whole recording, we can see, you know, roughly what, you know, we're going up probably high note of C4 and low note of G sharp, so like G sharp 2. So that's kind of the range of it.
Easy to keep all those promises with me. There was no way we could know. Will we ever understand the way that things would go? Can you feel it now?
So just kind of looking at like the visual representation, and let's see if I select all of the events and we choose, if we go to our zoom functions, we may be able to just choose zoom to selection, and then that would give us kind of our audio there. So that way we can see exactly kind of what our selection is based on the material, the content. So we're going to get up to like, let me know if that's kind of what you're looking for, Sable. All right, so Bratman Studio just asking Greg, how do you like to record your bass in the Cubase 15, direct or mic? Or I just usually go straight from my bass. Usually my recording bass is going to be a Warwick. And I just go straight into, I have a Steinberg AXR4U, which is a really kind of high resolution audio interface. It goes up to 32-bit integer, 384K. I just use kind of normal sample rates that the project's on, and I'll just record directly, just straight in. I may put a little bit, the AXR4U has a Rupert Neve Silk circuit that's been modeled and approved by Rupert Neve himself. So I put a little bit of Silk Red on, but it's pretty much just straight right directly into the interface. That's what I do. So when I play out live, I usually use an Ampeg SCR-DI. I have a number of other preamps. I got a Zoom effects unit, the B1X4, BX14 for Christmas as a gift. I have an Ampeg SVP Pro, which is like the rack mount preamp with 6 tubes. I also have a Yamaha PB1, which is a great preamp as well. But most of the time I just go direct. And for live, it's I use the Ampeg SCR-DI when I'm going just direct. And if I bring an amp, it's going to be an Ampeg BA115 version 2. But recording straight into the interface. So okay. See, Gareth says that he uses the S key to solo. I can't remember if that's the default. That is the default keyboard shortcut for solo. Okay, just reading through comments here. See, Mark Raven says one example he did was take a vocal track and duplicate and use Very Audio to MIDI and choir patch and MIDI voice, and it says equals yummy. All right, so we see, maybe if I miss this question, so let's say about soloing and unsoloing tracks with the same key command. So let me go ahead and just try here. So let's say I want to take the guitar. So I'm just, S is for solo, and then I can take the solo off by hitting S again.
Stepping over every wall and standing in the way. You easy to keep all those promises. Will we ever understand the way that things would go?
So just if you want to solo and unsolo the track with the same key command. It's a great part.
Fading time.
So you could use the same key command to.
Do you feel it in your heart? Can we really stay in love forever? Will you remember this time?
So just
Make it last forever.
solo the whole folder.
Will you remember my love? Forget the love that.
So if you're looking to solo and unsolo with the same key command, you could just use the S key. Mark Raven's also saying he used the VST bass amp. Right. Okay, so we see from Soul Sound Official, it says, I hope they add the ability to add one more value to frequency. So we could type 0.75, etc. So let me take a look at it. Yeah, so it looks like it rounds up. I mean, I could see, you know, I'm not sure if you would hear the difference between one cycle or not in an EQ. So I'm not sure if it's, you know, if it's actually that, if you would actually hear the difference going to 1/100th of a dB value. I'll pass it along regardless, but I think like in an EQ scenario that you may not actually, while it seems like maybe it's more precise, I don't think sonically that you're going from 20 to 20K, you know, if you changed one EQ by 1/100th of a cent, that I'm not sure if we would hear that, but I'll pass it along regardless. All right, so we see from Sable, it just says at Cubase Greg, yes, it would be extra useful. The keyboard could visually highlight the range and vary audio with a hotkey of sort. Developers might consider it. Thanks. Okay, I'll pass that along. All right, so Mark Raven just says, thank you all. Everyone here matters. Thank you. All right, it's a great sentiment. All right, let me jump back to a couple more questions that were mailed in. All right, it says, Dear Greg, I have the new Line 6 Helix Stadium XL floor unit for testing here. If I want to use the Helix Stadium as an audio interface, That means I have to have it switched to guitar and bass recordings to the Helix ASIO driver, and for the rest back to my standard interface, Army Fireface UCX. Would that cause any problem? So far, when I open up a project that I recorded on with the Helix audio driver, I get the message that certain inputs are missing, the ones from the Helix interface. What would be your suggestion? So I see this with a lot of different guitar processors that kind of function as an audio interface. If what I would do, realize that if you had a lot of different outboard processing gear that's already configured for your Army interface, I would just use the Army interface, and I would probably just go in analog. If I was recording my guitar through a Helix, I would keep my audio interface the same and just simply take an analog output. If there is a digital output like a SPDIF output, I'm not sure if there's one on the Helix, you could then connect like digitally out. So I wouldn't switch my audio interface to my guitar processor to capture it. I would take the analog output of the guitar processor and connect it into your audio interface and just record it like that. I think a lot of times it's, companies will put a USB connection on so that it's easy to do software updates and to download updates from a computer. So that's a good thing. And then they're like, if we have the audio interface, we can make it into a USB audio interface. So if I was a guitar player that did not have an audio interface, I would maybe use the Helix to capture the guitar, but I probably wouldn't run my vocals through it. I would say if you have an Army interface, I would tend to just take the analog output from my Helix and capture it directly into Army interface. And that way you have consistent clocking for all of your recordings as well. So I wouldn't go back and forth between the two audio interfaces. I would just analog out of the Helix into your Army interface. If you didn't have an Army interface, like let's say, okay, you're you're going on a weekend trip and you want to record your guitars and you don't want to take your Army interface, you could record with it. That would work, but I would probably just use the Army audio interface. All right, we have another question. Says one more question concerning audio connection presets. Does a preset recall all the audio connections, inputs, outputs, control room, or do I have to load a preset for each of the sections in the audio connections? So currently when we go to our audio connections, so say we come over here to our studio to audio connections, there isn't a global setting for like all of the settings. So the inputs, outputs, and control room are all going to be saved as independent presets. So they would all be independent of each other. All right, so we have a question from Soren that was mailed in. Sorry, this is a long-winded question. Short version question is, how do I get correct values when ripping songs with loopback? You can stop there if you get the hang of it. All right, so I think that when we're recording songs from loopback, that it's not going to necessarily maintain the level. We'll give it a try here. So let's say we'll come over, create empty. Okay, we're going to add a stereo audio track. And we're going to say our hardware input, we'll say, is going to be from streaming left, right stereo. So when we import and when we have an audio CD and we import the audio from the CD, that's actually extracting the audio from the CD. But I think when we do a loopback and we record, that it's actually just recording, but it's going to, the levels may change depending on what is, the gain structure of, let's say if you're listening to it on Amazon Music, listening to it there, versus, and you have volume controls, that those volume controls will make a difference in the gain that's coming in. So it's not necessarily extracting the audio, it's just going to pass the audio and we can capture it. But let's go ahead and just test it just to make sure. All right. So let's say if we want to, we'll play a little bit of this video since we have it open. All right, and I'm going to route my audio source here out to my streaming music. So now when I play, so now we're looking at primarily, so this is the step modulator, and now crossfading into the LFO. All right, so I'm going to go back here. I'm going to adjust the volume. The last one we're going to look at is kind of a typical sample and hold. All right, so let's say normal kind of LFO here. All right, so turn the volume down. So not the, but we want to take our cutoff. Now what we can do is I'm going to activate, so I'm going to stop this, and when we listen to our audio playback, we can see that we're going to have those areas. So it's not like designed to really get the exact volume level from the audio, because, changing the volume level, that's just, we're kind of recording it almost like, even though it's kind of like a software connection, it's still kind of just capturing it. So we come over, we'll listen to it, and where we adjusted the volume. All right, now the last one we're going to look at it. So we got to fade out, typical sample, and fade in. All right, so let's say normal kind of LFO here. So you're not actually extracting the perfect representation of what is uploaded on Amazon Music. You're just kind of capturing the audio source almost as if it was an analog capture. So if you had a file on CD, you could just simply do that. A lot of streaming services don't necessarily want you to have the ability to download the files. So as a way probably not to pay the artist as much, but if you were able to purchase the music and have a download of it, you could import that into Cubase and use that as a reference level. But when we want to capture utilizing loopback, that's going to be the gain is going to be adjusted by kind of multiple factors. So if I increase the volume or decrease the volume on playback, it's not, that's going to be that will affect the gain of the audio that's being captured in the loopback as well. All right, let me go back to live questions. Thanks for all the questions. And if you want to mail questions in, you can always email them into clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, I'm not sure if I answered this before, but from Rick at Brightman Studios is, do you ever use any plug-in amp modeling within Cubase on your bass, Greg? I used the VST bass amp quite a bit in mixing. So when I come over here, so we go to the audio track, this gives me like some nice Ampeg goodness that I appreciate. So if you go under distortion, you could come here. I have the Line 6 Helix plugin. So I usually do this in my cabinets. I'm usually like a 115 guy. So I kind of go for the Ampeg, classic Ampeg with a 115. That's usually my kind of preferred bass amp. I have the official Ampeg plugins. I think those are really good, but I tend just to kind of use this because I've been using it forever. But a lot of times I may not do a lot of processing. I try to keep it clean when recording. But I think the Ampeg plugins are really good. I think they're probably done in conjunction with the Line 6 modeling guys. So check out the official Ampeg plugins are good for bass, but the VST bass amp also will get you great tones. All right, so we see from pscript 3259 says, "Hey there, today I migrate my Cubase 12 Pro with dongle environment and songs to new laptop. Any order of steps and considerations to make it a smooth transitions?" So Cubase 12 is actually not utilizing the USB e-licenser. Cubase 12 is the first generation of Cubase to use the Steinberg licensing. So it's really just a matter of once you go to, if you go to your Steinberg download assistant, you want to just simply go to your Steinberg download assistant, log in with your My Steinberg credentials. So like your username and password for your account. So you just log into your account information here, and then you would see all of your products. So you could have your Cubase 12 installed in 3 computers at once, and then you should see it in the activation manager. So once you come over here, you'll have your activation manager, and then on your new system, you could activate it. If you wanted to deactivate it from your old system, you could also do that on your old system through the activation manager. So, and then, so you don't have to migrate your USB e-licenser if you're on 12. So if you're on Cubase 11, you would just simply move the USB e-licenser over. But Cubase 12, that's on the Steinberg licensing, you would just simply go to your, once you activate this, then you could download and install your Cubase. Go to your activation manager, and then you could activate it right there. And you could do that on up to 3 computers. All right, so you see from Sable Winters clarification says, yes, Greg, yes, it would be extra useful if the keyboard could visually highlight the range in Vari Audio with a hotkey of some sort. Developers might consider it. Yeah, so let me know if it's a keyboard in the. So let me know if you tried the zoom to select all of the Vari Audio segments, and then go to zoom to selection. I think that will get you there. Let me know if you need it further than that, Sable. All right, so Steven 285 asks, "Hi Greg, do you know if Steinberg would consider including a MIDI-driven animation, or if there's any process for submission?" Let me know what you mean by MIDI-driven animation. Like if you wanted to do, obviously Cubase can capture MIDI data. It's often used for keyboards and drum machines, but people use it as a communication protocol for lighting and different aspects, as well as just a way to get information. But if you could let me know what you mean, Stephen, by MIDI-driven animation. All right, so we see from George says, thanks, Greg. I'll do just that. I think it's a question with the Line 6 Helix and the RME interface. It says, I need to figure out a way to record the DI along with the audio of the guitar amp, but with the Stadium, that shouldn't be a problem. You know, a simple thing to do if you want to record the DI is just simply go into a direct box and take one channel, the direct box, just take one channel out of the direct box into your audio interface and the other going into like the line through, just going straight into the Helix. Then you could capture, you know, even a really inexpensive direct box, like a $29, $30 type of direct box, I think would handle that task. And that way you could have the, you know, you see that a lot for, used for bass players where, you know, they take the line out to feed it into their amp, and then the XLR is going to front of house. So you could just take the XLR to your audio interface, and then instead of feeding it to the amp, feed it into your Line 6, and then you can record probably a stereo signal from your Line 6 Helix or the Stadium and record the direct guitar, so that you could just simply go back and, if needed, you know, reamp it and send it through, stuff like that. And I'm not sure if you get the Helix plugin with the Helix purchase, and if you get that, then, you know, you could utilize that as well. But check out just a simple direct box to capture the live input if you need to reamp. All right, so we see from Ball says why tracks that are used as sidechain input get one send effect slot populated if they're sends rack. All right, so if we wanted to come over, let me just import 2 tracks here from a different project, make it a little cleaner. Okay, so let's say if we want to sidechain this bass sound with the kick. All right, so example I use a lot. So let's say on this particular track, we go to the inserts. All right. So we want to say, okay, we're going to guitar dynamics, and let's just grab compressor, and we'll just go super heavy on a compression, and we're going to set up our sidechain input here. So let's go ahead and say we're going to go look at our kick track, and we will say let's go to our sends. Okay, so when the default behavior to simplify this is say, okay, we're going to use our kick track as a send. As we do that, as we activate the sidechain, so now we do this. So we're basically feeding that particular sidechain input through a send. Now, if you wanted to, and we'll activate the sidechain. Sorry about that. Now, I think if you didn't want to utilize the sidechain, now the advantage of this is you could have varying amounts of the sidechain. So you could adjust how much of the sidechain is actually being affected by it. So if you have very little sidechain, so this could give you degrees of the sidechain depending how much of the send you're using. So people will use that and automate it as a creative source. I think if we also just come over and let's say we go to, let's see if we have our direct out. All right, so let's say if we want to take our direct out and send it to the sidechain, and we're going to go to the sends and turn this off, that now we could have the sidechain. So we're going to just turn this. So now we're not hearing the source, but we could still get kind of the side chain. So you could use a direct routing if you don't want to use your effect sends, but you don't get the varying amounts of it. So, but if you needed to use all 8 effect sends for effects, you could just simply use the direct output as well. So. And then I think if we go to our direct outs and we choose to sum, let's just look at our mixer here. Just hide my inputs. All right, and let's say if we go over here and when we turn on our direct routing summing mode, I think just looking for the so now if we enable direct routing summing mode, so you could do kind of different creative side chaining just by using the direct outs if you don't want to utilize the send. All right, we see Sable's going to the Grammys. All right, so you see Hoy Boy official says, thanks so much, Greg. I could toggle a solo just by pressing one key command now. I couldn't do it as a toggle on prior version of Cubase, but version 15 allows it. I don't think there's any changes with that. I think that's how it's always been, but maybe it was a user setting or something that you had. All right. All right, so we have Fernandez Herodes saying hi to everyone. Thanks for being on. All right, John Barry VU says, hi Greg, I used a home key in my QWERTY keyboard to jump to the top track, which is where my master bus is. Recently noticed by mistake if the mouse is over a fader It jumps to max. Any other uses for it? Let's see if not sure if my keyboard has a home key. Let me just. Oh, yeah. Okay, here. All right, so let's take a look in our key command and just see. So usually that will just kind of take you to the top. So it could depend on what is selected. So here we could go to the top of the, if I want to have this particular track at the top, if I probably have MIDI notes. So there, it's going to move it up, like pick particular MIDI notes, can almost like, yeah, so it could be just that it's taking the parameter to the top. So let's say if I come here to this channel and hit home, it's going to just take that to the top. So that might, it could be utilized in other, so let's say if I'm here, so yeah, so it may also affect, different parameters. So let's say if we're here on our pan, let's see if it affects that. Yeah, so, it's kind of like certain functions may be to, knock it to the top, and that could include the fader as well. Okay. All right, so we see Soul Sound Official. It just says, question, if we want to speed up drum and bass and instruments on newly recorded vocal in a certain part of the song, should I set everything to musical for more energy? Does the elastic modes affect it? So yeah, you could just put everything in musical mode. So let's say if we jump back, this is kind of set up. Let's see if we could just do this if everything's in musical mode. Here it may not be. Just revert. All right. Okay, so I'm just going to select all of my events. Let's see if these are all. So it seems like they're all in musical mode. Let me check the vocals. Okay. All right, so let's say we're playing here. My tempo is. All right, so let's say when we go into the chorus here, I want to just bump up. Say from 100 to 102. Some of the background vocals. So some of those aren't going to be. Let me just go to my pool window. Yeah, my pool. So, but if it was in, I'll just do something I know is in musical mode here, just to show this. So if all your tracks are in musical mode, kind of start with, we'll come here, let's just add our tempo track. So this is all audio here. All right, so say. Alright, so I'll just adjust my tempo track here. Let me just say our first tempos will be 100. And let's say we want to go to 104. So let's say. So when it gets to coming up here after our drum fill, we'll just have it speed up. Tracks, not musical mode, but that's all you have to do. So once all of your tracks are in musical mode, let me just check. And again, if we go to your media, and then you could just type in just whatever tempo you have, then all the tracks will speed up and slow down with vocals or not. Okay, Beverly Beatty says, Greg, would you kindly go over comping vocals? So I have a comping bass part since you don't want to hear me sing. See if it's in my recent. All right, let me open it. All right, so what I've done is recorded a quick part. So let's say I'll put this into like a 2-measure loop. All right, so if I was just recording, so say I come here to my vocal part, we'll show you. Okay, now one of the key things you're going to have is this little thing for lanes. Okay, so show lanes. If you don't see lanes, you want to right click and go to the track control settings. And if it's in the hidden category, you'll see lane display type. What you want to do is just to add it over there. All right. So when I go, I'm going to go ahead and open up lanes. All right. So when I'm recording, I'm putting it in like a cycle mode. We see this is going to be like take 2, take 3. Now, if I open up lanes, every take gets added to the bottom, and it will mute the previous take. All right, so what this will look like, let's say I've recorded tracks here in my bass, and I want to open up the lanes now, so we'll just take... Alright, so I open up the lanes, and here's all of my performances. Now what I want to do is we select, we have a dedicated comp tool, which looks like a hand. So what I could do, instead of having to cut different parts and unmute, I could kind of just swipe over different parts. And And what that'll do is allow me to just say, okay, I can turn my snap on. I want to hear this note from this take. So say, oh, maybe I didn't want that. Let's try this one instead. So each of these is a different take, and we could pick the different parts from this take. So as I select them, we see that this kind of automatically gets promoted to the top here. And if I say, okay, I want that to extend over a little further. And now that I have that done, I could close the lanes. And you notice that when I click on a different lane, that the waveform image at the top here, this is our actual track, and these are all kind of like sub-tracks, will change based on my lane. So when I come over here, now I have my comped part. So make sure you record kind of, and you don't have to be recorded in cycle mode. They could be recorded like, months apart, whatever. But if you record in cycle mode, you could then open up the lanes. If you don't see the lanes, right click, go to your track controls, make sure that the lanes are visible, and then use the comp tool, which looks like the hand. And you don't have to, before we'd have to kind of manually cut, select this one and mute all the other ones. Now we could just kind of select and cut using the comp tool, like so. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Beverly. Right. Sorry, let me Chatfield. So we see from Oscar Mickelson. Hi, Greg. Are there any plans for Cubase to develop some sort of source destination editing mode like in Pyramix, or would you perhaps have any suggestions how to work in Cubase like this? So this is one of the differences between Cubase and Nuendo is we could have a range selection in Cubase, a single range. But if we go to Nuendo, we could have an A range and a B range. So let's come over here and say, okay, let's go to Nuendo 14. So it's not necessarily a Cubase function. So what we could do here is just say, okay, so so even if we have like a folder track, so let's say I have like range 1 here, so let's say this is my source. I can come over here, so let's say, okay, this is selection A. So if I want to copy that, and let's go to selection B. So now I could go, okay, let's go to A, copy, and then B. And I think we could just navigate to, and navigate here to the B selection. So let's say, here, I'll just draw an event in. Okay, so we'll go to our range. Let's say B, A. So now I could say, okay, let's go to selection B. Let's go to paste and go to the end of that selection. So you can create macros to do so, but it's kind of a unique thing to Nuendo where you could kind of go back and forth between source and destination using multiple range selections. I'm not sure if that will make it into Cubase. I'll pass it along as people wanting to do that. But you could do it in Nuendo a little easier. All right, so we see from Alex, hi Greg, why does Cubase have a separate Mackie control option in Studio? What's so special about Mackie? So Mackie, it's in around 2000, Mackie came out with a controller. I guess probably 1995-ish, they came out with a Huey controller. And at the time, they made a deal with, I think it might have been a little earlier, but they made a deal with DigiDesign that they would always have, that if they do and build a control surface, that it would always be a part of Pro Tools software. So that was part of the contract. So they made a kind of a small format controller called Huey. So their next generation was called Mackie Control. Now Mackie Control was kind of an 8 fader controller that was designed to and could work with multiple recording applications. Now the Mackie Control itself isn't necessarily like a beautiful controller. It was a functional controller, but a lot of people and a lot of companies had backward engineered the protocol so that when you're working with a Mackie control device, there could be 100, 200 different devices that work as Mackie control. So it's kind of a communication protocol. So it could work over USB, or I believe it can work over MIDI, like a 5-pin DIN MIDI cable. So for a long time, starting 25 years ago, people would just have, 2 or 3 Mackie controls. So you could have a base Mackie control unit and multiple extenders, and that was kind of their control surface. So it became kind of very ubiquitous, a very commonly used control surface, and the protocol was open. So you'll see just about every DAW will support Mackie control because, not only are there still a lot of Mackie control units, but there's hundreds of devices that utilize the Mackie control protocol. There are limitations of it, such as they always expected, when it was originally designed, people were doing maybe 8 or 16 tracks of audio. They weren't doing 300 tracks of audio and instruments at the time. So, stuff like, you always have to initiate the selection from the hardware as opposed to selecting within the Mackie control protocol. Selecting a track doesn't automatically update the control surface to the selected track. So if you select a track in software, you'd have to manually bank over 200 times or however many times you need to do to get to that specific track. So while it's in kind of an older protocol, it's still a widely used protocol for kind of widespread compatibility. So many keyboards, like MIDI controllers, the transports will utilize Mackie control because they don't have to rewrite an entire new protocol script just to get basic communication with programs. So what we see with the MIDI remote is kind of an updated, more flexible, methodology, but that's kind of the history of Mackie control and why you see it kind of listed so often and talked about and discussed. All right. Okay, just seeing discussion about the Grammys. Not sure when they are. All right, so John Barry VU just says, hi Greg, I got an issue this week where I accidentally dropped several automation events at bar 212, way beyond 2 minutes a song. I could not scroll to the location, had to step along each event. All right, so it could be that maybe if you couldn't get to that part of the song in the future, what you could do is when you go to the project setup, come over here, and when you see the project duration, try to change the project duration to be longer. And you could probably also say, okay, let's say if we have an automation point here, so let's say we have automation on a track and we want to kind of select it in a clever way. So let's say we have it starting measure 27. So let's say I go to the end of the song here. So let's say I go. So we could probably create a project logical editor to say, okay, I want to come over here. Let's say we want to delete say media type is equal to automation, and let's say our position is beyond cursor. So let's see, we have these automation points here. I'll put some automation points before the cursor. We'll put some after the cursor. So cursor is here at measure 9. So let's see if this works. Yeah. So if you run into that situation again, you could just delete media type is equal to automation. The position of that automation is beyond the cursor or beyond a specific bar. So you could try that in the future, John, if you run into that. All right. So we see from Balsa who asks, hey Greg, in your experience with orchestral templates, what is more common and practical? One track per instrument, use expression map and key switches, or a track for each instrument's articulation? So I think anyone that's set it up since the expression maps have pretty much utilized one track for instrument. The people I see that are doing like shorts and longs on different tracks are people that have been doing that for 20 years before expression maps allowed them to not do that. So I think most people are working on a single track and multiple articulations available, especially if you wanted to be able to take your project and, easily give it to an orchestrator, or if you're orchestrating yourself or printing out parts to be able to have everything unified, and it's not like, oh, we missed 2 staccato notes because it was a different articulation and we just, didn't find that particular, we just left that part out. So I think most people are utilizing one single track with expression maps. And if other people want to chime in. All right, so we see from John Barry, says, hi Greg, to add to that, I could still not see the automation event, but it showed an info line, so I could delete it. Could you show me how to delete automation events outside a certain range? So, yeah, so let me know if that did the trick for you. Hopefully that logical editor. All right, so we see Sable Winter says, I've been supporting Lanewood Studios channel lately. He drops into our Hangouts from time to time. Yeah, I think he does some great videos. Smart guy. All right, so John Barry is in favor of doing the Zoom meetup on the 27th. So let me know if anyone else has feelings on it. If not, we'll do that since it'll be the last live stream of the month. And Sable's also been dropping into the State Azure live ambient sessions. He says, so inspiring and comforting to watch him build. All right, so Oscar says, hi, thanks for your answer. I'll have to look into that function in Nuendo. Great job with these live streams. Well, thanks for your questions. It's always, the live streams are great when people are asking interesting questions, and so it's a great community. I'm very proud to be involved. Randy Lee Music just says, please tell me it's Friday. It is Friday. So, all right, so we see from John Barry, just says, cheers, Greg. Nice to see the logical editor in use. Had a bit of a brain freeze at the time. Should always remind myself to look at the logical editor. It's like having a great assistant in the studio. So, and it's always good to, like when you run into situations like that, save a preset because there's a good chance that you might run into it again. So, all right, so we see Garrett says, if I orchestrate myself, I'd be atonal. It says, fun thing to do with this tiny plug in of the day, put the pitch shifter plug in a vocal track and turn on plus or minus 12 semitones in the mix and add a low level to taste. That's pretty good. All right, we see Tiago joining from Brazil. Thanks for joining us. John Barry VU says, when AI comes to the logical editor, it will be called Greg. So I just try to figure out how to use it for people. So. All right, I think we are out of questions. Let's see if there's other questions that kind of come in. All right, so we see Mark Brugler says, have to run. Thanks for your help and ongoing support. See you on the 27th. Yeah, so once again, for people that may not have heard, at the beginning of the live stream, I will be at the NAMM show next week. So we won't have live streams. I'll be setting up as well as working at the show. If anyone's going to be in Anaheim, send me an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de if you want to get together for like an appointment or just meet up somewhere. It's always wonderful meeting people. I know Rick has been out, Tim Weinheimer, and many other people from the live stream. It's always wonderful to meet people in person. So old school, it's great. I'll give it another 15 or 20 seconds and see if we have more questions pop in. John Beer VU says, have a great NAMM. Wish I could be there. It's probably more fun if you're going to the show to attend than working. So, but it'll be busy, but I'm looking forward to seeing so many friends. Some friends of mine from Germany I haven't seen in years. So, all right. Well, it looks like we are out of questions. I want to thank everyone for all the great questions. I hope that everyone's learned a new tip or trick. And if you have questions in the future, you could always send it by email to clubcubase@steinberg.de. I want everyone to stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you back on the 27th. And look forward to meeting people at NAMM. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Everyone have a wonderful weekend, and we'll be back on Tuesday the 27th. Thank you so much. Goodbye.